Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with politics. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are looking to shore up key voter blocks with Election Day just 22 days away. The vice president and her running mate Tim Walz will crisscross the so-called blue wall states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin this week. Over the weekend, Harris met with black elected faith and community leaders in North Carolina at a rally in Greenville. She called out former President Trump for not releasing his medical records.
One must question, are they afraid that people will see that he is too weak and unstable?
Vice President Harris released her medical records on Saturday. Her physician said she maintains a healthy, active lifestyle. Trump told CBS in August he would very gladly release his records. So far, he has not.
Well, meanwhile, Nathan, Trump is splitting time between battleground states and Democratic strongholds like California, Illinois, and New York. This week, he'll participate in a Fox News town hall in front of an all-female audience with a focus on women's issues. Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, says Vice President Harris is too radical on abortion rights.
While she hides behind the popular slogan of Roe versus Wade, Kamala Harris's actual abortion views, I think, are much more radical than even a lot, I think, frankly, most of our pro-choice citizens.
J.D. Vance appeared on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio. In that same conversation, he refused to say whether Trump lost the 2020 election.
And tomorrow, Karen, we're going to hear from the former president. Right here on Bloomberg, our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, will interview Trump in the noon hour Wall Street time at the Economic Club of Chicago. Tune in tomorrow to catch that conversation live on Bloomberg Radio and television.
And another political note from the weekend, Nathan. A man was arrested for gun possession outside Trump's rally in Coachella, California on Saturday. The Secret Service says Trump was not in any danger and the incident did not impact protective services. The agency says the investigation is ongoing.
Well, Karen, President Biden was on the road this weekend as well, visiting Florida for the second time in 2 weeks, surveying the damage from Hurricane Milton. The president announced more than $600 million in recovery aid for areas stricken by Milton and Hurricane Helene, and he discussed the progress being made before boarding Air Force One.
Everybody seems pretty happy with the way it's going. We're not leaving. The next thing to do, we're going to make sure we get the money in there for small businesses.
President Biden says he has received bipartisan support for his administration's efforts in addressing the crisis.
Well, we turn overseas now, Nathan, and 4 Israeli soldiers were killed last night at a military air base, and dozens more were injured in a drone attack that was launched by Hezbollah. It's one of the deadliest strikes against Israeli forces as the country stepped up attacks on Lebanon. Speaking through a translator, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is now urging UN peacekeepers in Hezbollah-held territory to leave.
I'd like to appeal directly to the UN Secretary-General. It is time for you to remove UNIFIL from Hezbollah's strongholds. The IDF has repeatedly asked for this and has been met with repeated refusals, all aimed at providing a human shield to Hezbollah terrorists.
And the UN has so far refused Prime Minister Netanyahu's requests, which could come ahead of a ground invasion of northern Lebanon. Beirut says that more than 2,000 people have been killed and hundreds of thousands displaced as fighting ramps up in the region.
Also happening overseas this weekend, Karen, China's highly watched investor briefing. Officials promised more aid for the country's slumping property sector and indebted local governments, but they didn't give headline spending figures. Union Bancaire Privé economist Carlos Casanova says it was not the fiscal market moment that markets were looking for.
It is clear that they are just tackling some of the structural issues. They're not really looking to massively inject, so it does not constitute a whatever it takes moment.
Carlos Casanova with Union Bancaire Privé says further market fluctuations should be expected. Still, Goldman Sachs upgraded its forecast for China's economic growth this year and next.
Well, we want to turn to company news now, Nathan. A successful operation for Elon Musk's SpaceX, and Bloomberg's John Tucker is here with the details. And John, they executed a pretty complicated landing procedure. What's going on?
It was quite a sight. One of the boosters on the Starship rocket, Karen, successfully flew back to the launch site and was caught by giant metal arms, what the company calls chopsticks.
On the first ever attempt, we have successfully caught the super heavy booster back at the launch tower.
The largest and most powerful launch system ever developed lifted off Sunday morning after propelling Starship to space. The Super Heavy booster returned to the launch site on Earth, where it reignited its engines to slow itself down as it came in for the landing. This allows the rocket to be reused in future missions. The launch taking place from SpaceX's Starbase facility in Boca Chica, Texas. Recovering Starship's booster after launch was a crucial milestone as SpaceX readies the rocket for commercial operations. The vehicle is the centerpiece of Musk's ambitions of sending people to the moon and Mars. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
Yeah, that catch was wild, John. Thank you. Much different story this morning for Boeing. The plane maker is cutting 10% of its workforce. That is about 17,000 people. Boeing's new CEO, Kelly Ortberg's hinting more dramatic action might be needed to get the company back on track. It is on track for its worst annual performance since the 2008 financial crisis.
Well, elsewhere, Nathan, the bond market is closed today for the holiday, but equity markets are open. And this week, traders will be watching a parade of earnings that kick off tomorrow. Bloomberg's Charlie Pillett has a preview.
We'll be hearing from Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Bank of America, among many others, with a focus on the outlook. Kevin Gordon is Senior Investment Strategist at Charles Schwab.
The important part for earnings, maybe not just this quarter, but as we start to turn the quarter into 2025, is what does guidance actually look like? Because you look at estimates for the overall S&P 500 for next year, for next calendar year, they're pretty lofty, they're pretty elevated.
Also this week, we hear from other financials, including American Express, U.S. Bancorp, Charles Schwab, and Blackstone, along with CSX, Johnson & Johnson, and Netflix. In New York, Charlie Pellett, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thank you, Charlie. And finally, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is hosting executives and politicians from around the world at the UK's Global Investment Summit at London's Guildhall. It is the first big test for the new Prime Minister's plans to reignite investment in the UK. Bloomberg's head of economics and government, Stephanie Flanders, is going to interview Keir Starmer this morning. You can catch that conversation live at 9:30 a.m. Wall Street time right here on Bloomberg Radio.
It's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. An IV fluid shortage has worsened when Hurricane Helene flooded one of the country's largest suppliers. Because of the shortage, some hospitals have been delaying non-urgent surgeries and substituting oral electrolyte fluid to patients. Dr. Chris D'Orenzio of the American Hospital Association.
Make no mistake, the impact of this shortage reaches nearly every hospital in the country.
In late September, Hurricane Helene's floodwaters engulfed a Baxter International plant in North Carolina. The plant produces more than 60% of the country's IV solution. Dr. Celine Gounder, editor-at-large for public health for KFF Health News, says that another supplier is helping to ramp up production to help fill in the gaps.
B. Braun Medical, which is the second largest manufacturer of IV fluids, is stepping up its production at a facility in Daytona Beach, Florida. Fortunately, this plant was not severely affected by Hurricane Milton. B. Braun is expected to resume manufacturing and shipping soon, providing some much-needed relief.
Dr. Gounder spoke to CBS. An urgent manhunt underway in Michigan. Police say an elderly man was murdered inside his home outside of Detroit, with authorities believing the suspects were posing as utility workers. One arrest has been made. Police are still searching for one of the two men they say posed as utility workers to gain entry to a Rochester Hills home, where they allegedly killed 72-year-old Hussein Murray, then tied up his wife with duct tape. Oakland County Sheriff Michael Bouchard.
We believe that they were specifically targeted, that it wasn't a random thing knocking on random doors.
Sheriff Bouchard says the scene was so gruesome, investigators say it's still not clear how Murray was killed. It's Columbus Day. The day officially celebrates Christopher Columbus's arrival in the Americas. In New York City, the annual Columbus Day Parade returns to Fifth Avenue to also honor its Italian cultural roots. Meanwhile, many Native Americans across the U.S. will come together for Indigenous Peoples Day to celebrate their history and culture and acknowledge the ongoing challenges they face with a focus on the election. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With the Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. And here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The 100th postseason game in Mets history, and in Los Angeles, it did not go well. Mets had only 3 hits, lost game 1 of the NLCS 9-0. That's 3 straight shutouts for the Dodgers. 3rd team to ever do that in the postseason. 33 consecutive scoreless innings, a period where they've outscored the Padres, and now the Mets 23-0. Mets made the surprising decision to start the NLDS with Kodai Senga. He had only pitched 5 innings all season. They did it again. It didn't go well. Senga gave up 2 runs in the first inning, another in the second, when Carlos Mendoza stuck with him.
This is some of the tricky decisions here, where you pull him too early, where, I felt like he was one, especially after he got that pop-up, with the bases loaded. He was one hitter away from getting out of that inning. Muncy got him with a single. And then he went back out there and gave up another one.
Mendoza starts Sean Manaea. Today's game 2. Dodgers will go with a bullpen game. Starts at 4 o'clock, 4 hours before the Yankees and Guardians begin the ALCS at the stadium. Carlos Rodon versus Alex Cobb. While the Mets were losing, so were the Giants. Bengals got a 43-yard touchdown run from Joe Burrow 3.5 minutes in. There was not another TD scored until the Giants tied the game 35 minutes later. And 54 minutes after the Burrow run, a 30-yard TD scampered by Cincinnati's Chase Brown. The Bengals won 17-7. The Giants hurt in the 4th quarter by 2 missed field goals and got stopped on a 4th down. Same stadium tonight, Jets and Buffalo. First game for Jeff Ulbrich, the Jets' new head coach. The Patriots' 5th loss in a row. Houston won in Foxborough 41-21. The Commanders and Ravens were both riding win streaks. Baltimore won 30-23. No blown lead this time. Liberty led all the way, won game 2 of the WNBA Finals 80-66 over the Lynx. Series tied at 1. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. It is no holiday for the presidential race. We have 22 days until the election day, and the contest between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump appears tighter than ever. Former president may be trying not to jinx it. Here he was at a rally in Prescott, Arizona last night.
I think the polls are wrong about a lot of things, although I don't want to say that now because we're leading, so let's leave them.
Well, meanwhile, the vice president is ribbing Trump for not releasing his medical records after she put out hers, and she's calling out Republicans for misinformation around the hurricane response. Let's get more on the state of the race now. We are joined by Bloomberg News managing editor Derek Wallbank. Derek, good morning. There is a powerful tool on the Bloomberg terminal that can give you a snapshot of the presidential race. WSL Election Go on the terminal. It shows Kamala Harris ahead by about a point, maybe 2 points in the polling averages. But in the betting markets, Trump is starting to show a pretty significant lead. What does that tell us about where things stand with just about 3 weeks to go?
Nathan, you're right. There has been a divergence, and a lot of what it is diverging on is some state-based polls. I think the betting markets have been far more responsive to the idea of state-based polls that maybe your biggest polling aggregators might not go for so much because they're maybe from more Republican sources. And so there has wound up being a little bit of a divergence there. But I mean, look, you can see a lot of this sort of thing take its place throughout a lot of different trades, right? The Mexican peso is a great example of this. Donald Trump's own listed company is a great example of this. There are any number of ways that people are right now betting the election right the way around the world. And that is, if you're telling a lot of traders right now that the best way to figure out their chances of who's going to win is to take a quarter out of your pocket and flip it up and see where it lands, people don't like that. They want a little bit more certainty. But look, Nathan, this is a coin flip election, is it not?
Seems to be at this point. I mean, how much is the level of concern on the Kamala Harris side about how things are breaking for her, particularly when we're hearing from former President Obama on the stump, sort of calling out black men in particular for showing some reticence around her. And we just got an announcement from the Harris campaign this morning of a new program she's proposing aimed specifically at black entrepreneurs.
Well, I think Saturday Night Live parodied this, and their Kamala Harris character was basically saying, how am I tied with this guy? And I do think that there is some view among, maybe Democrats right now who are sitting there saying, like, there have been a lot of stories that come out, a lot of things that have come out about Donald Trump and reinforced about him that don't paint him in the most attractive light, some of the things that he's said in recent weeks. And there is a certain concern that Harris has gotten up to parity with Trump, but has not been able to take that and put it into a defined lead. Yes, there might be a slight lead in the national poll averages, but you, I, and everyone else knows that's not how the United States elects a president. It is the Electoral College. You are looking at these 7 key swing states, and there has not really been a big sort of gap. This is part of why Harris and her vice presidential pick, Tim Walz, are going to be spending so very much time this week in this sort of blue wall, Midwestern Rust Belt states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. At the end of it, I fully expect Kamala Harris will know what her favorite Detroit Coney dog is, because she will have been to Michigan so very, very much. And look, when you're talking about individual segments of the electorate, right, at some point when it's this close, every little bit counts. And so if you're talking about a segment of the electorate like Black men who overwhelmingly vote for Democrats, but maybe are not polling as voting as much for Harris as they might have for Obama or Biden or insert other people here, then yeah, if you sit there and you say 65% support, we focus on that, we get it up to 70% support, that becomes real numbers, especially in places like Detroit, especially in places like Philadelphia.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.